Okay, from our studios this week in Los Angeles and Tampa, this is Green Tag Theme Park in 30. I'm Philip from Gantom Lighting and Controls, and I'm joined, as always, by my delightful co-host, Scott Swenson of Scott Swenson Creative Development. On Green Tag, we look at the top news each week, and we pick the stories we think matter most to themed entertainment professionals. This week, we are back to Six Flags because they have some exciting news in that they are bringing back their park presidents at 10 of their properties. And I know just Scott really wants to talk about this.
No, I just find it interesting that Six Flags, we see Six Flags going through kind of the microcosm of a theme park lifespan. They've broken up, they've expanded, they've contracted, they've come together, they've joined somebody else, and now they're going to. They've gotten rid of everybody.
They still lost some people.
And they still lost some people, and they let people go, and then they brought in new people, and then. So it really, quite honestly, this could be a whole university course just in tracking what the hell happened with Six Flags, and maybe that would be the name of the class. What the hell happened to Six Flags? If any of you university types out there want to do this class, let us know. We'll be happy to help. We've been living it for quite some time now, it seems. So
yes, yeah, because of course the context is, as Scott said, not merger, and then a few weeks ago they sold the parks. They finalized the sale of the multiple parks, and then they had a new CEO that came on that replaced Zimmerman, and we have John Reilly now and so I think this is kind of the first big thing that the new CEO John Reilly has done, which is to bring back these park presidents. And it was funny because I think we talked about it originally when they got rid of the park presidents. Mm-hmm. And I think, was that the silo conversation? I think that was the silo conversation that went viral on TikTok.
My biggest issue when they got rid of them was when you lose a park president, then it leaves a control vacuum, and it makes the interior workings of a park siloed. So it very much very much could have been the silo conversation. But you have the internal workings of the park all compete. You have merchandise competing with culinary, competing with entertainment, competing with rides and operations, competing with human resources. There's no buck stops here kind of voice. And the argument is, well, that comes from the corporate side. But the downside of that is the corporate side doesn't necessarily know what's happening in the park itself, because these organizations and conglomerations that own parks in many, many, many different locations, like Six Flags, they may know what is great for the parks in theory, but there's always going to be those anomalies. And I know that Six Flags Great America, for example, runs very, very differently than Carowinds. They have a different audience. They have basically a different climate, both physically and business wise. So you kind of have to have somebody with boots on the ground making those decisions. And I think this is a great step forward. I firmly support this.
Yeah. I realized I didn't read the list of the parks or any of that. We just kind of jumped into it. But basically, yes, they're bringing back 10. And it's interesting because this has not been formally announced in a press release or adjusted online or any sort of anything officially. This actually came from an exclusive interview that we don't know who actually gave the interview. It was just a source at Six Flags that was given to the Orange County Register, right? And so supposedly this week we're gonna maybe get the official statement posted somewhere. Probably as soon as we record and post this video, they'll make their announcement officially. But so the 10 parks are Canada's Wonderland, Carowinds, Cedar Point, Kings Island, Knott's, Six Flags Great America, Great Adventure, Magic Mountain, and Georgia and Texas. A few other tidbits that came out from the Six Flags officials when they were talking to the Orange County Register is that Rafi is going to return back to Knott's Berry Farm as VP and park manager, and then the previous park president from Carowinds is actually moving to Six Flags Magic Mountain. So Brian is moving from Carowinds to Magic Mountain. And of course, as I mentioned, this comes just a few weeks after they closed the final sale of the six parks to EPR properties. And notably missing from that list is Six Flags Fiesta Texas and Kings Dominion. They are not on the list, or Fiesta, Texas, not over Texas, but Fiesta, Texas, and Kings Dominion are missing from this kind of park property list. And there are a lot of people with a lot of opinions as to why that might be. Most of them center around it's a potential sale or something, because those have received a lot of capital investment recently, and then they're not on this list. So it also could just be that we don't have the official announcement out yet, and maybe they're going to put it on there, but they haven't. I mean, there's a bunch of other reasons it could be for that, but too as well. But and it's just interesting because I looked back at when we covered John Reilly and his little listening tour, right? And in his listening tour, he talked about how he described a chain that had suffered from inconsistent standards and a lack of accountability across parks, after the merger. That's exactly what Scott just said. There's a lack of accountability of a person, at the park level. And I think originally, way back over a year ago, when Scott and I first talked about them removing the park presidents, we did leave open the possibility that it would be a good thing, because in theory, it might be able to kind of help some changes get implemented faster. But clearly it didn't work, because when John Reilly went around, and you see, he said it, there's a lack of accountability. So I think it ended up being more what Scott just said, where there wasn't, the buck stops here at the local level, and that has caused this confusion. And so I think this is all logical. Like, he did his listening tour, he talked about it, now he's implementing this. And I think even the park choices are logical, because if you look at even the Conjuring experience, which I keep harping about, because I think it's a good future path for them. But if you look at that, Carowinds, Cedar Point, Kings Island, Kansas Wonderland, they're all mapped to these 10 parks. So I think that looking at these 10 parks is probably a good indicator of where Six Flags at least thinks they have the most growth potential or earnings potential. And they're looking at these 10, and the choice to bring the Carowinds over to Magic Mountain is also interesting, because that is one of the ones that probably has the most potential, because it's in the SoCal market and it underperforms. So, and it also has a complete lack of any sort of identity or anything. It's just sort of like a coaster park. And I think also it's this idea, like Scott has talked about in the past, of how do you make the park differentiated locally? And in order to do that, you have to have a coherent vision, and you need to have a leader that brings the team to that vision.
And has a strong understanding of what the local demographic is, has a strong understanding of, when people, like, for example, and I think what I think is interesting is that Magic Mountain and Knott's, I realize it's a very congested market. I understand that. But in essence, could be considered competitors to one another, even though they're owned by the same company. But they could very easily be considered competitors to one another. But in places like, I'm going to speak to Six Flags Great America, only because that's the park I grew up in, and just recently went back to. And with Six Flags Great America, there's not a ton of theme park competition in that part of the country. So they have always been kind of the only game in town. I think the closest thing they've got as far as competition goes is, and it's not really even competition, but it's Great Wolf Lodge, which is the water park hotel that is right across, literally across the highway. But what ends up happening is they kind of have a hand-in-hand working symbiosis, because people will go and stay there, and that way Great America doesn't have to have their own hotel, but there is a shuttle. So, there's all kinds of unique situations that I think need to be addressed on the local level. I guess that's my point, is that, the park presidents for Knott's and Magic Mountain need to be in very close conversation with one another, so that they're not trying to compete with one another. They may find that there is a symbiotic relationship that may help them from a financial standpoint. But if you don't have any park presidents, there's nobody there who's going to say that. There's nobody there who's going to be able to explore that. And the Six Flags, the Great America Park, sorry, I'm just so used to calling it Six Flags, just because that's what it became finally. But Great America, they don't have to necessarily be as in tune with or strategically planned with other park presidents, but they do need to understand what are our local alliances. How can we get people out of the city up north to the park itself? How do we pull from the surrounding states, because they're not that far from two other states that they could actually pull attendance from. So they all have their own unique individual challenges, and to have a park president in each of these locations makes the most sense to me.
I think, well, I agree with that all 100%, but I'm wondering to Scott, if you have any other like lived experiences or examples from maybe when you were doing Busch, because it's a little bit similar where you had, well, I guess it was before the SeaWorld thing, but you have Busch is there and then SeaWorld is right. It's sort of tangentially, but it's sort of like, in terms of how that park president even helped even with seasonal events and having somebody there that's kind of guiding, because we saw that with Six Flags last season, right? Where when you have just one regional person, they're looking at it like everyone has to do Christmas, or that you get these mandates, but then they're not localizing it. And so then you could see where it wouldn't work in some parks because they're not accounting for the weather differences or for the demographic differences. So is there anything from your experience working in the parks that you...
Well, it's interesting because when I first started at Busch Tampa over 30 years ago, Busch Gardens and SeaWorld operated almost completely independently of one another, as did Busch Williamsburg. Then when corporate got more and more involved, and they moved more of the decision making up to the corporate level, they found some great sharing of best practices. They also found some economy of scale there when it came to ordering certain things. Yeah. Like we knew, for example, the first example we all saw and recognized was when our soda cups, our paper soda cups, had all the parks in the system on it. Because what they were able to do is, and it's a small thing, but what they were able to do from the corporate level is to put all of those, all the parks on one single cup, do gigantic orders, which drove the per unit cost way down. And that was a good thing from the corporate level. Where we ran into challenges, based on my experience and my opinion, quite honestly, where we ran into challenges is when corporate tried to say things like, this particular element or this particular show, and I'm going to deal with that simply because that was what I lived when I was there, worked well here. We should just lift it and place it here. And that doesn't always work. Even in the California parks, if you were to take a show from Magic Mountain's Halloween event and place it into Knott's, or vice versa, I think it would be horrible. I think it would because they're completely different audiences, at least from my preliminary experience. They're very different audiences, and they wouldn't particularly care for the wonderful show. The show that was a huge success in one park wouldn't resonate with someone in another. So I think that's where the park presidents come in. I think the park presidents can come in to make certain that those kinds of economies of scale are being handled, and every park is getting the most out of it. But it also creates a bit of a stopgap or a valve to say, okay, I see that you've invested X, Y, and Z in this show, coaster, element, pick something, and so we won't have to do any of the beta testing or any of that. We've got it all, but it needs to be tweaked this way to come here. One of the best examples was between Busch Williamsburg and Busch Tampa. They literally tried to take coasters originally and just remount them, same theming, same everything, and there was huge pushback from the park presidents, actually, who said, no, that's not our brand. And considering that one park was European themed and the other one was African themed, it just made zero sense. There were even situations where, and this was catastrophic, but and I think everybody who's been involved in theme park for any length of time knows this story. But the whole Drachenfire debacle, when the Drachenfire coaster was originally designed, it was designed for Florida. But then the corporate decision was made, and I'm sure that a park president probably I'm sure the park president in Tampa was really pissed off about it, and the one in Williamsburg was thrilled. But it got moved to Williamsburg without changing the design. Challenge there, it gets cold in Williamsburg. So that's why that coaster was removed, because they couldn't get the lubrication right in the wheels, and it created too much friction when it got cold. So it's one of those situations where you need those decision makers with boots on the ground in the location at the park, so that they can help facilitate the economy of scale, help facilitate the best practices throughout the corporation, but also speak to the uniqueness of the park, so that you don't get force fit with something that worked like crazy in another park, but it ain't going to work here. So,
yeah, I tend to agree with that. I mean, there is a lot to the best practices, like the idea that we keep coming back to this idea where we talk about Christmas is a good moneymaker, Halloween's a good moneymaker, but how those things manifest in your park, you need somebody at the that sits at the center of. Otherwise, like you're saying, there's the power vacuum, and so each of the departments is going to have a different perspective on it. And but you need that person who can take that best practice and decide how it should be implemented at their individual park, right? And then tap into economies of scale where needed.
There needs to be. Excuse me. I think the park president needs to be a mediator amongst the departments, so that everyone feels as though they are being heard and recognized. So that's managing down for them. They also need to manage up to the corporate level to make certain that they are part of the economy of scale and that their needs are heard. And then sometimes they just have to be the one who makes the final call, saying, you know what, that's not going to work here because of X, Y, or Z.
Yep. Okay, well, we can, I think, move on, unless you have anything else to say about it.
No more Six Flags?
No. We're going to stay at Six Flags, but do a different story.
Oh, okay. Meanwhile, elsewhere at Six Flags.
Elsewhere. So this was something we didn't talk about for a few weeks, but I thought this was a good chance to bring it back up, is that Canada's Wonderland has made their chaperone policy permanent for children 15 and under. And that's basically the whole story. But I could tell you that
okay, moving on. Our next story from... No.
Yeah. They seem to... So this was something we haven't talked too much about it, just because I was kind of waiting for a big Six Flags discussion to bring it in. But this has been going on. We've seen this for Halloween for a while, where they had this chaperone policies that come into effect and then they come out of effect. And then recently we've been hearing, or I've been reading more news reports about like teen takeovers. And it seems like, I don't want to like belittle it, because I'm sure. Yeah. Anyway, I just think it's a little funny, but it's probably because I'm not in the middle of it. But anyway, so this has been happening at multiple venues around North America, where they are teens that are planning takeovers of places, of an attraction, and then they'll go and there's like swarm the attraction, and then sometimes it leads to fights or property damage. And so now there's been this like movement where there's people will call into the sheriff's tip line in different places, and they'll hear about it, whatever. So that's the context. And then Canada's Wonderland cited some of that context as to why they're kind of trying to keep this chaperone policy permanent. But as we've talked about in the past, it's sort of like, I'm not sure about the viability, because it says each chaperone can supervise up to 10 young guests per day, which I was like, if you think you can chaperone 10 like tweens effectively, that you are mistaken in that. But I don't know. I guess, so what do you think about this idea of like this backlash to these like teen takeovers? Of course, this has been a real thing. We've reported on it for years during Halloween, especially, where teens cause problems in the parking lot, or they, did whatever nonsense. But this seems, again, like we're just trying the wrong incentives, right? They're set up to fix this. But what do you think about this whole mess of chaperones and teen takeovers and blah?
I think this is a much bigger problem than chaperones.
Yep.
That's just that's my opening statement. I think the whole concept, we've all, it's the whole idea of be there or wish you had, that kind of approach that is happening,
Yep.
and that is being and has been for years propagated through social media.
Yep.
That it used to be there'd be a hidden rave party that someone would take over and do lots of drugs in a warehouse somewhere or on a beach somewhere and then go
Yeah.
home. But
Yes, that's
now,
what I remember.
yeah. Well, if you remembered it, then you weren't really participating. But
That sounds also right. Yeah.
yeah, you were taking video of it with a big Betamax camera. And so anyway,
use that for later is what we're
yeah,
not.
yeah. No, but the idea of that going into something that is violent or creates property damage, I don't quite understand it, and I therefore don't have a great solution for it. So I'm thinking that at least putting in some sort of chaperone policy, it's a start. I agree with you, Philip. I don't think it's the best solution, but I'm not certain what kinds of proactive nature could be done. I mean, I see this. So recently I was in Knoxville doing some work for the zoo there, and I went to a mall for dinner one night just by myself, and it was a Saturday night, and it was filled with exactly this age kid.
Yeah.
And they're just hanging out, and they're not, I didn't see anybody causing any problems, but they're just hanging out. But I could certainly see that if one person started a post on one of on Insta saying, we're all gonna meet at the food court and be there, or you'll wish you had been, that kind of thing. And you had 5 people who had planned to just trash the place.
Yeah.
I don't see how anybody. I mean, and there's security patrols in the mall, and there's police force in the mall, and I mean, anecdotally, I have heard stories, and I cannot confirm these, but I have heard stories that major retailers, the reason many of them are pulling out of the malls is they just don't like the mall mentality. They don't like the clientele that the malls are bringing in, which are primarily tweens and early teens. And so, like, for example, when I walked by, and I thought about this as I walked by the Apple store in the mall in Knoxville, it was packed. It was packed with 13, 14, 15-year-old kids who had no intention of purchasing anything in there, but were testing out every single thing, and sometimes not quite so tenderly, pretty much everything on display in the Apple store.
Yep.
So you take that in a shopping situation and then expand it into a theme park situation where we're already getting people's adrenaline levels up. They're already excited to be there. They're usually there to, prove something. I'm cool enough or strong enough to ride the coaster, or I can do this, or I can walk around with some big ass animal that will sell in a garage sale in 20 years. I have no idea what the answer is. I do think that simply getting more adults who are responsible for the behavior of these children I don't think it's a solution. I think it's a stopgap measure at best. But at the very least, because you can't, we've talked about this before, you can't prosecute children the same way you can prosecute an adult.
Yeah,
and
right,
if you have these adults who are legally responsible for these children, I would not take on the responsibility as a chaperone to take care of what did you say, 10?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. It's I don't know, maybe I'm just old, but it's like you can be 21 or older. So you could have a 21-year-old brother who's watching, 10 tweens. That's just not. That's not a thing. I mean, that's not that. I mean, that's.
But the 21-year-old brother, though, can be charged then.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
If the minors do something illegal.
Yeah, and again, back to the thing I thought was most interesting.
How are they tracking this?
Well, exactly. So exactly, this is where it gets into all these weird logistics. And then also, the park said the policy was in response to unruly behavior seen at other amusement parks, entertainment venues. So this is not in reaction to something that happened there. It's like I said, it's this backdrop of it sort of feels a little bit like a moral panic in a way, or just a little bit like, where it's like there are people calling sheriff tip lines to be like, the kids are gonna swarm the trampoline park at dusk. I mean, it's sort of this weird little thing. And then in response to that, this theme park is adding back in a chaperone policy. And to your point just now, how are they tracking it? How are you even enforcing this 21-year-old is gonna be chaperoning these 10?
And how do you even know that this is the chaperone?
That's right.
What do you do? Do you when you so say I'm a 12-year-old child, which is kind of the way I think most of the time. But say I'm a 12-year-old child and I go over and I me and three of my buddies decide we're going to pull over a signpost. So we pull a signpost out of the ground and throw it on the ground and run off, and I get caught. So what do? Have me call? They ask me who's my chaperone. What if I say I don't have one? What if I say I don't have one? Then what happens?
Yeah, they're back at square one. Yeah.
Because that goes back to their entrance policy.
Yep.
And if it is it that you all have to enter together, okay, but then you don't have to stay together once you're in the park.
Well, they said that to stay after. That's right. They said to stay after 4 p.m. But exactly to your point. So are they putting little like wristband trackers on that? Like, how are they gonna? If you enter in at 10 a.m. and then you're staying the whole day, you didn't need to enter with the chaperone at 10. So it's only after 4. So are they doing park-wide sweeps to check, or are they stopping random teens like the entire night and being like, "Where's your chaperone?"
Where's your chaperone?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I probably should have called them.
If anyone's listening who knows how this works at Canada's Wonderland, let us know, because I don't see how. I think the concept is right. I think the implementation seems to me like it'd be very difficult. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, it's easier for Halloween because it's the entire duration of the event and it's a separately ticketed event. So it is like you have a definitive open and a close. You can check tickets, you can check chaperones, you can have people. And even then, I know because I've been to Knott's, I've been to these parks, to Six Flags during Halloween when they're supposedly chaperone. Even then, it doesn't work because there's so many people in the park and there's so few staff that you might have the chaperone for when you enter, but then everyone just scatters. And then the rest of the time it's not possible. It's like, again, it's back to that thing. If you wanted it to be like, honestly, the way to do it would be to just not sell tickets to them. That would be the only way to do it. But the parks don't want to do that because they want the money. And
Absolutely.
So you gotta.
And who is the highest market for roller coasters, thrill rides, and haunt events?
That's exactly right. So I sort of feel like the theme parks are like, I don't, again, I feel like this is going to upset a lot of people, but I'm like, this is your market. You need to figure this out.
Demo. It's your target demo.
This is your target demo. Or just don't sell to them and change your target, or just be like, you can't even come into the park unless you are over 16, and we can't go to Halloween unless you're over 16, and then just make the experience better. It's this weird tension we've been talking about forever, right? Where like
but I mean, let's go back in time. How many of you listening can remember when you could enter a theme park without going through a metal detector?
That's true. Yeah.
I can. I remember that. Metal detectors. What? I remember the first time I went through one. It was the very first time I went to Halloween Haunt at Knott's. I was like, what? I have to go through a what?
Yep.
Wow, what is this, a high security prison?
Yep.
But now it's common practice. Now it happens everywhere.
And it doesn't happen at conventions. Actually, something you said, now I was actually thinking that the last convention I was at, that I thought it was weird that we didn't go through a metal detector. Like when I went to, the last time I've been to the Anaheim Convention Center, for WonderCon or for even San Diego Comic-Con. Huge, enormous conventions. No metal detectors, no security. And then one of my friends is like, you only think that because you're American.
I mean,
anyway,
Tampa Comic-Con had to go through a metal detector.
Yep.
So it's one of those. It's just one of those situations where I wish there were a good answer. I think that, without sounding too philosophical or too crotchety, get off my lawn kind of old guy, I think the challenge is what that demographic represents has changed. And I think that if there is any way to keep these kids involved so much in what they're doing that they don't have time to get into trouble, I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but hopefully you guys will start some great conversations about it on social, and we'll read them, and then we'll know the answers. Because let's face it, we've said from the very beginning, we're not here to spend these 30 minutes answering all the questions. We're just making sure that all the questions are being asked. So that's all the questions we have, or all the time we have to ask questions on this particular show. So we're going to head off into the great beyond, and hopefully we will see all of you next week here on Green Tagged Theme Park in 30.